myself. If I don't like what I write, if I don't like what I'm writing, it's not going to be a good writing. I'm not going to be there. So I don't know if you want to address this now or something that we'll find along the way, but it's reconciling that tension, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up, and it will come up again. And I'm glad you brought that to the fore. Um, we've absolutely got to be true to ourselves. That is the starting point. We need to be true to our work. But we also needed to be comprehensible to whoever we're getting the message to. Now, not everybody is going to be your audience, as you've said. So I think that this is a very nuanced practice. And I mean, if you had a 5-year-old, say you had a grandchild, and you were making a cake together, would, you might explain the chemistry of baking in certain terms to that child in a different way than you would to someone who, is an adult and has a higher education degree, because their ability to understand the concepts might be different. So that's just one example. But again, you don't have to make sense to everybody. You don't have to there was a drink company, one of my professors at Columbia. He was one of the marketing professors, and he worked for 1-800-Flowers and these big companies. And he said that one of their clients once was Snapple. It's a drink, one of those like fruit drinks, iced tea, packaged goods. And he said, the president of the company, when we sat down for this marketing strategy, he said, who is the customer? And he said, everyone with a mouth. And, the marketing team's mouth hit the floor. And they're like, you can't target everyone with a mouth, because everybody with a mouth isn't going to drink Snapple. We have to, segment down, and we have to narrow down. And so, Sebastian, I take your great question as an excellent challenge that Martin and I want to help you figure out who it is that you feel comfortable reaching the way you want to reach them by retaining that integrity. Okay? All right. All right. Great. So, anything else, anybody?
Um,
Okay, Tina.
Hi, yeah, I was going to say that I really love the way you phrased the communication and marketing as an act of service. I think that really already helps me because it's sort of the discomfort I feel is about promoting myself. And so, yeah, I've put that in big, bold letters already. So I think kind of setting out on this course with that in mind that, I'm sort of the kind of conduit for this
Yes.
experience that we want to share with others. Yeah, thank you for that.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you. David, did you want to add something? Or
I just
Patricia?
wanted to ask, I like to mull over things. Is it possible to send the slides to us, or is that difficult?
That's fine.
That'd be nice because I can go through it in my own time, and I've taken a lot of notes, but I missed one or two things. Yeah,
Yes, great.
thank you.
And that was my question too.
Okay, great, great. Certainly. As long as nobody shares it with anybody
No
else.
way.
We're
Yeah.
good with that.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Okay, Martin, it's all you.
Okay, well, in that case, I'll give you some more slides. Um, right, so we've gone through that one. You know who you all are now, and you've introduced the Frontier Journalists Association. That's our strapline covering the mysteries of human experience. And we are,
Martin, I
yeah.
can't see your screen.
Oh,
Okay, great.
There's probably a lag because my Welsh internet is a little slow, shall we say. So, yeah, so we're an international network of open-minded journalists interested in the interface between science and spirituality. That's the remit. Now, when I first came to journalism, when I joined the BBC as a very green young graduate, way back in the late 70s, this book had just come out by Dorothy Nelkin, an American, called Selling Science. And she proclaimed that science writers are the true Prometheans, carrying the fire of research down from the ivory towers to the people. That sounded very good and made me feel very important. It's absolute rubbish. We are all Prometheans. Um, Journalists are no longer something separate, something special. The media world is changing. I was very lucky in my career. For a start, I was working mostly for the BBC, though I did quite a lot of freelancing for New Scientist and Sunday papers and various magazines and so on as well. But I didn't have to go out and find an audience. The media that I was putting my stories on came with a ready-made audience. In the case of BBC World Service, where I did most of my work, an audience of tens of millions. So that was, a real privilege. I didn't really even have to sell my stories, at least not at first. I had to sell them internally to an editor, but very often, if I didn't sell them a story, they'd come to me and ask me to write a story. So it was never difficult. It was just a question of deciding which story. And way back then, this was the media world, national newspapers, broadcast television and radio, big circulation print magazine, specialist academic journals. That has all changed. They have got much smaller. And now, as Liza was saying, we've got websites, social media, blogs, podcasts, video channels, and potentially everybody is a publisher and everybody can be a journalist. The question is where and to what audience. The danger is that you find somewhere that will take your stuff, is interested in what you're interested in, or if you start doing something yourself on your own blog or podcast or whatever, you're just talking to people who want to hear what you're saying. You end up in an echo chamber where everybody is listening to what they want to hear, and they're not hearing anything from outside that chamber. You're not getting it to anybody else. That's the danger. And if you are all journalists, then you have to think about ethical journalism. Again, at the BBC, I had the great privilege of having lawyers and producers' guidelines and people to clear copyright and all sorts of things like that. If you're doing your own thing, you don't have that. You don't have editorial guidelines. You have a great deal of freedom, but with that freedom comes responsibility. Responsibility to be ethical in what you say. I'm sure in the present company, I don't need to say the need to represent minorities, to not be anything ist, not be racist, not discriminate on any grounds at all. I see Liza's got your hand up. Have you got something you want to slip in?
Thanks. I would just like to say, as you're talking about the ethics, just as science-minded people respect evidence so much, that burden of proof, if you will, also rests on the shoulders of journalists. I mean, when you're writing a national story, a big story, you need to check 3 sources to make sure that you're getting a well-rounded story. So I just wanted to say, as you take that kind of burden of proof or the evidence in academia or science, that approach also journalists face that. So, they won't just go to one person and say, tell me all about consciousness being primary. They're going to have to go to more than one source, just so you know.
And of course, if you're writing a blog or doing a podcast, you don't have fact checkers. If you're putting it out on Facebook nowadays, you don't gonna have fact checkers either. Um, and there's the really, as Liza was saying, there's news and there's fake news. I fear from next week that term fake news might rear its ugly head again, but um, it's really truth and what other people would like the truth to be, even if it isn't true. So, what is truth? In our area, I'm sure a lot of you have probably questioned the metaphysical assumptions of science that everything is material and can be reduced to its parts and so on. Well, even science is going beyond that now, I'm relieved to say. And of course, there are many different ways of knowing. There's the objective way of the scientific method where you put up a hypothesis and you test it and you repeat it and you measure it, and if somebody else measures it, and if you all get the same results, then you think of it as truth. But there's also subjective experience, what a lot of us are interested in through psychology and transpersonal psychology and so on. There's also intuition, there's creativity. Where would we be without intuition and creativity? So they are forms of knowing as well. And of course, there's belief. I was once rounded on in an interview by Richard Dawkins, who accused me of having religious belief. I was pleased to say that I didn't have the belief gene at all, but I'm homozygous for hope. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just got a call coming in. I won't be a second. Say something interesting, Liza.
Okay. Um, Now, I saw that several people have had quite a bit of experience with the media. Um, who, just raise your hands. Who has had and who's been interviewed by the media? Okay, great. That's 4 people. And who has had, say, an article published in outside of an academic journal? Okay, great. Anybody been on a radio interview? Okay, great. And how about speaking at conferences? Great. And how about an academic journal? Okay, great. So that seems like everybody has some experience. How about penning, let's say penning an article as a blog or something else on okay, great. So good. You all have a great deal of experience already. Good.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry to drop out briefly then. I just noticed that it was a call from my son, and I became a grandfather a few days ago. But I've put off a call from a bit later. So where was I? How quickly does that come up? Has that come up now?
No, it should, yes, now it's on.
Okay, so there's a lag of about 5 seconds. So yeah, if we're all ethical journalists, we need to be honest. We need to tell at least what we believe to be the truth. We certainly need to be fair. And this is a rule which I certainly try and abide by, and I think it's very much a rule that's drummed into us at the BBC, and I hope it would be something that you would consider as well, and that is to distinguish fact, or the facts to the best of our knowledge, from opinion. It gets very muddled sometimes if somebody. This is the difference between news and current affairs. With the news, it's all facts that have been checked from three sources, and hopefully there isn't too much bias put on it. But then you'll have the current affairs program, and you'll get people from different political persuasions and so on commenting on it all, and that's opinion. And it's, I think, really important to distinguish between the two. So let's, for the moment, put aside all the new media of podcasts and blogs and social media and so on, and think about what we need to do in order to get a good story. Well, it could be on your own outlet, but most of this, of the section that we're going to go into now, is if we're going to try and get a story into mainstream media, into newspapers, magazines, broadcast, and so on, and reach a big audience. And the first important thing is to find your story. So, and here I'm talking mostly about news stories, stories that would go in maybe the science news section, or a science magazine or something like that. So, in my time, at least in the BBC, we scan the major journals like Nature and Science and quite a few others, and any ones that are in areas that we're especially interested in, to try and find new stories. We get press releases. I used to get probably 100 press releases a day. And so if you're putting out a press release, bear in mind that the hard press journalist or editor will probably only read the title and the first line, unless they're going to take it a bit further, just because there's so many to choose from. And some of them are so dull and irrelevant you wouldn't believe. Conferences, yes, if you've got the time to go to a conference, you often get some interesting news stuff there ahead of when it appears in journals. News events. So, well, as a science reporter, I would be asked to comment on, for example, whether climate change was contributing to the fires in California at the moment, or about, as a lapsed geologist, about a volcanic eruption or an earthquake or something like that. Where you can, it's nice to travel. I was very lucky that I persuaded my editors that the scenery was very important on radio. And so if I was making an astronomy program and could find the budget, I got to go to the telescopes in Hawaii, just because the scenery is so good on radio. And sometimes personal contacts. If you're a regular hard-working journalist, you'll have a book full of contacts, and if you've got them really well trained, they will contact you if they've got what they think is a really good story. So you can be the personal contact for a journalist if you know one, and give them a good story. But don't give them loads and loads of not very good stories, or they'll stop taking your calls. One hopes, as a good journalist, not to be using secondary sources. By secondary sources, I mean other journalists, basically. But if all the other daily papers have got a story and you haven't, you have to sort of think, well, why did I miss that? Well, I better do something on it anyway, even if it's a different angle. And of course, nowadays, there's social media. And sometimes there's new books. If it's a significant new book that says something that is genuinely new. what we tend to forget about is the need for topicality, at least among news outlets. You know, it's no good thinking, oh, I've got a really nice story, and when I spoke about it at a conference last month, it went down really well, and it was published last week in a journal. You've missed the boat. You need to be thinking about it. It's going to be published next week in a journal. Therefore, next week it's going to be a news story. Let's get it out there in time. So yes, topicality. Of course, there's more and more rolling news now with everything is live. I find that a bit unsatisfying because you get the same story coming up twice an hour, and each time it's only advanced incrementally, if at all. For a daily outlet, for radio, for a daily paper or something, topical means today, or at least in an organ of reporting, no further away than yesterday. There are weekly outlets, of course, so something that's so this week is still a topical peg. Recently, that's a fudge. I'm a geologist. Recently can mean any time in the last million years. If you have to say recently to give it a topical peg, you're leaving it a little bit late. And, well, textbook, that's more than geology. That's purely fossilized. And once it's in a textbook, it ceases to be interesting because news in science is that at the frontier where it hasn't been carved in stone yet. So can you create a peg or a topical peg for your thing? Yes, if you've got something coming out in a journal, ideally something like Nature, that in itself is a peg, and the journal might even put out a press release for you. Lesser journals are better than none, but you probably have to do your own publicity for that. And it could be a book if you've written it, and if it's coming up for publication, the ideal would be to send out a review copy to a friendly journalist, so several weeks preferably before the publication date, so that they could actually have read it and written something interesting about it. And a conference, yes, if you're giving a paper at a conference and there's something genuinely new in it, even if it's a scientific and medical network conference, then that's a peg. But you need to know your target. So if you're going for a newspaper, you need to read that newspaper regularly, know the sorts of things that they like to put out and how long they want to do. It's no good if well, I had people coming to me saying, I'd like to do a program on Radio 4 about something or other. Oh yes, what slot would you like to, what would you like it to, what time of day would you like it to be? Oh, I should think maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. Oh, okay, so you want it on Woman's Hour, do you? They obviously hadn't listened to Radio 4 and didn't know what was on at that time of day. So know your target. Allow enough lead time. Typically, well, a radio program, in my experience, will be set definitely the day before, possibly recorded several days before, even if it's a science news program, if it's a weekly program. Something just came up in the messages, which I can't see while I'm sharing slides. Was it something I need to respond to?
It was just to give a time check and say we had 20 minutes left, but that was a few minutes ago.
Yeah. So we've now got even less than 20 minutes. Topicality, yes. think like a journalist. And now, yeah, think of news. Avoid clashes. Yes, well, if it's appeared in one place, don't try offering it to another place. That was simply that one. And don't try and do something that you're not comfortable. Be a bit brave, push the envelope a bit, but don't. I think what I mean by that is expand your comfort zone to include what you want to do. So if it's a piece of research that you've done yourself, know your own research inside out and be able to answer awkward questions about it. And of course, get help. Maybe we can help. We've got a network of journalists who are interested in the same sorts of things that the rest of us are interested in. We can help you to find and focus your story, maybe even to produce or at least edit your press release. You're not alone, but we need to know in good time. But focusing your story is really important. So what actually gives a story wings? Yes, impact. What does it actually mean for the people who are going to be hearing it? Does it affect their lives? Does it make them feel good or at least make them laugh? Is it relevant to their lives? Is it topical, which we've mentioned? Human interest sometimes, yes, if it's something that's transformed somebody's life in a good way, or dare I say, even in a bad way. And if you're talking about television, are there pictures? Is there something other than a talking head that could go with it? Are there sounds if it's radio? And if you're very lucky, you get a bad news day when they're really scraping around for a good story, and that's another possibility. But there don't seem to be many bad news days at the moment. There's just days of lots of bad news.
Exactly.
And of course, media rivalry, that's an interesting one. Journalists love to have an exclusive scoop, but only if it's a really big story. They don't want to be the only one telling a rather dull second-rate story. They actually almost prefer to hunt as a pack. I've been at press conference where Fleet Street journalists have been talking among themselves about what angle they're going to take, although the other journalists are representing rival newspapers. They all want to make sure they've got about the same angle so that they don't get hauled in by their editor and say, hey, the Guardian's got this story, why haven't you got it? And they hate to be the only ones missing a story. Sometimes you can put a story out with an embargo saying not to be reported until the time of a conference, for example, or the day of a publication. That way, everybody gets the story, and the slow ones have time to work it up and do it properly. And it gives journalists a little bit of power over their editors. The Sunday papers hate it unless the embargo is for a Sunday. And nobody's going to take much notice if you just by yourself impose an embargo on a story. It needs to be a journal or a conference or something like that imposing it. So the important thing really is for finding the story in yourself. And for that, you need to be actually really excited about your own research, be excited about your work, spot what's really new about it, and see the wider implications. And then you can share the fun and the magic. And the bottom line, if you're going to write a press release or a short story, you wouldn't necessarily begin it with these 4 words, but could you begin it? Scientists have discovered that. So is there something specific you can say in one sentence that is a new discovery? That's the most useful tip for selling it. And I won't, that's, if you look at the slides later, you can read this. This is just an example of how not to do a press release. You've raised your hand again, Liza.
Is it okay if I make a comment
Absolutely is.
on your last slide? What was your last slide?
That one?
I just want to say, because not everybody here in this group is a researcher doing direct science
Sure.
that is going to be putting out a story about this latest discovery being as part of a study being published in this journal. That's like the, one aspect is that if you're doing more of a human interest story, or you're talking about a movement like, Tina's ethnography, or Diane or Patricia talking about your messages, these kinds of things, you can find the facts that serve as sort of a news peg from somebody else to use that to get into your story. For instance, in 2024, the Pew Research Institute found that 52% of Americans believe they have been contacted by a loved one who has passed. That study, I mean, that's one fact. And you could build you can use that as a news peg to hang your story on. Doesn't mean you had to come up with that research. So I just wanted to say, if you have your story and your message, and it has to do with physical death is not final, or dreaming of vivid dreams where someone visits you, something like that, there's research out there that you can use. And if you subscribe to Pew Research, for example, or you set up a Google alert for tell me anything that has to do with life after death, you get a fact from somewhere else. You can use that as a jumping off point. So listen, if you're doing research that is, you're the primary source for that, fantastic. But if you're not, and your work is a little different, you can use that as a jumping off point. Martin, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, not all pages, even of a newspaper, are news. There's also, the health pages, the human interest pages, and so on. It just points to the need to read the paper that you're going to apply for and see who the relevant editor is for that section. Cut your cloth according to. I'm mixing metaphors, but you know what I mean. There are things we don't want certainly in a news story, or indeed in anything. One is incremental trivia, just tiny advances to stories that are already well known. We don't want lots of jargon, long words we don't understand. We don't want to be talked down to. That's a little bit of an art, I think, but you've got to explain it nice and clearly, but not mansplain it, as they say. My guiding principle is always to underestimate the knowledge of the audience, but never to underestimate their intelligence. People really don't want to know that you've just been awarded 2 and 6pence by a research council, or that you've won 3rd prize in the village flower show. What they do want is a big story, a news story, a significant story, human interest story, or something that's fun. We do tend to get the and finally stories, but they're the ones at the end of the program that people remember. And occasionally something controversial. Celebrities, yeah, that's a sore point. And increasingly, I found with the BBC that I could sell a story if I'd got a celebrity presenting it. Um, I think it's not something that I would necessarily go along with. But the first sentence has got to grab if you're putting something out. The story itself has got to be up front. You can give more background to it later. Don't bury it. No jargon. Stick some quotes in if it's a print piece, and make them sound like something you would actually say. And be specific. Don't use phrases like experts say and at a recent something or other. Be specific. What expert? You know what an expert is, don't you? Where an expert is where X is an unknown quantity and spurt is a drip under pressure. So don't quote experts, quote specific authorities, and be able to answer the question, why should I care about that? I haven't got much time left. I'm just going to very briefly mention a story. We're going to come back to Rupert Sheldrake next week, but there was a big annual science conference organised by what is now the British Science Association, and was then the British Association for the Advancement of Science. And I managed to get a slot at this for a conference, for a session for the Scientific and Medical Network. And at that session, Rupert Sheldrake came along and talked about his very scientific results for telephone telepathy, how far more people than you would statistically expect could tell if somebody was about to phone them. And we did a little press conference for this. The journalists didn't come to the session itself. They came to the press conference, and then they got together afterwards and tut-tutting. They were all good materialist reductionists, and they started phoning their pals like Richard Dawkins and Peter Atkins and Robert Winston, who were all good materialists. And the papers the next day, on the front page, and several of them had this story about telephone telepathy with quotes from their pals who hadn't been at the session, saying how disgraceful it was that the British Association should be publicising this rubbish. Now, I don't know, is that good publicity? I'll leave it to you to decide. It was sort of bad publicity, but it got telepathy onto the front page of the papers. I thought that was useful. Now, before I shut up, I have 3 minutes. You have a little homework. It's only very little homework. What I would like each of you to do is to write a short popular news story about some aspect of your own research or experience, as if you were doing it for a serious daily paper. No more than 600 words, half a side of A4 is fine, shorter is fine, and then email it to us by the end of Friday. I should warn you that next week's homework will be a series of interviews when I will interview you for no more than 5 minutes on the stories that you have written up this week. So they'd better be ones that you are able to talk about. Marilyn, I see your hand.
I just wanted to say about Rupert that he has the most remarkable capacity to spin those negative stories to his benefit. So, in his case, a bad press is good press.
Absolutely. And I remember on the Today program the next day, the big Radio 4 current affairs program at breakfast time the next day, they'd got Rupert Sheldrake and Peter Atkins in, and Peter Atkins said, Rupert said, just look at my data. It's all there in a peer-reviewed paper. And he said, and Atkins said, I don't need to look at your data. I know it's rubbish, which was a good point scored for Rupert in my book. Okay.
Liza started this whole thing by, the skeptic. And I think open-minded skepticism is key. And those debunkers, there's just no room for that. But being open-minded about your skepticism is, I think, a really powerful way to present.
Absolutely. Right. We have 1 minute for any questions. I've stunned you into silence.
Patricia.
I would like to ask if, as an example of a scientific journal, of an article there that you would like to use as an example for us to kind of get a taste for it, would that be possible to be sent as a link or?
Well, wait a
something?
second. I think Martin is just used that as an example, but it's not about necessarily pitching a science journalist. It's about getting your story out. Is that right, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so it's an actual real story that you want to get out. It's a message you want to get to a journalist, not publish on your own blog, but something you want to get out. Now, the reason we're very oriented to scientific research is because that's really the hardest sell. So if we focus on the hardest sell, we can get everybody else. But yeah, it's considering really, and I would just say, what is most interesting or urgent to each of you about your work? What is the message you want to get out? And using Martin's guidelines about, what's timely, what's new, what's topical. And what I loved what Martin said is he said, what gets you excited about it? And then after you use that to brainstorm your ideas, the next question is the who cares? Why should I care? And the way that I would put that, another question is, what is going to be practically meaningful or impactful for the person who's going to end up getting this story? I don't mean the journalist. I mean the end user, if you will. Is it going to be informative? Is it going to be entertaining? Is it going to give them an aha moment? Is it going to be something that possibly, shifts their beliefs or their behavior in some way? So anyway, what is the benefit?
David.
Very helpful, Liza. Thank you.
Hello?
David.
Yeah, I have a slight problem with that. I think if it's a popular news story, serious daily papers won't be interested. And if it's a serious story, the popular people won't be interested. It's impossible.
Yes, you can't. I'm not expecting you to be all things to all people.
Is it a popular story?
It's a
or
story
popular
that
paper?
it's
Or
a story that
story for a serious paper.
it's a
It can't be
story
both.
it's a story that excites you, and which you can summarize in no more than 600 words.
But for a serious or a popular paper? And is it a serious or a popular article? It's in the middle, but it's
Yeah,
a tricky one.
I mean, you choose. No, you choose.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
So it could be Scientific American, it could be the New Yorker, or it could be, I don't know enough about the publications in your area, or it could be like the BBC education reporter, right? It could be something
Maybe the
like that.
Spectator. Maybe the Spectator.
Okay.
That's quite chatty, but it's serious.
Yeah. Good. Tina.
Can we publish this before, like if we send it to you on Friday, can I put it on LinkedIn over the weekend?
You mean, can you break your own embargo?
Yes, I guess. I've just got really excited about what I want to write, and then I thought, oh God, LinkedIn would be a really great place for this. But I mean, I can wait until we've done the work for next week.
I don't see a problem putting it up there.
Thank you.
Martin, aren't you going to provide feedback on the stories?
Yes, yeah.
And will that be in written form, or how will you do that?
I'll a bit of both. If I can find the time, I've got a lot of deadlines for some podcasts myself at the moment, but I'll try and do a short written feedback to everyone. But first at the meeting next week, I might share one or two examples from you and make a few comments there, but I won't name and shame you.
And I would suggest, I know I've gotten a couple LinkedIn connections with some of the people here. And if you haven't connected to Martin and me or each other on LinkedIn, you might like to do that. So we can support each other and like each other's posts. As Tina said, when her story, whenever that goes up on LinkedIn, wouldn't it be nice if we all, supported that? Because by virtue of doing that, our connections will see the kind of content we're interested in and it get exposed to something else.
That
Excellent.
sounds good. Can I say something very quickly?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking now that Tina said that about LinkedIn, because I got an article that is just about to come, is in the press now. And I was thinking I could write a short piece promoting the article in LinkedIn and another one in Psychology Today, a bit more expanded, touching on that. With a slightly different spin, but all kind of, is that the idea?
Yes. I mean, we only want one, and
Yeah, sure,
you decide which angle.
Yeah.
But I would say it might have serious content, but there's still no reason why you shouldn't make it fun.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no. I got a few ideas out of that. Thank you.
Lovely. I look forward to reading them. Well, we expanded the session by half an hour and we've still gone 7 minutes over, but I'm really excited at having you all here and look forward to continuing next week.
Great. Thank you
Great.
all. Bye.
Thank you all. Great meeting.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.